At exactly 7 in the morning, the silence of the Denver apartment was shattered by a voice that carried the sharpness of a blade. Helen Adams leaned over Rachel's bed and shrieked as if the world was on fire. 7 o'clock, and you're still asleep? Get up and make me breakfast right now. Her words were so close, so loud, that Rachel jerked awake in an instant, heart pounding. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, until she saw the familiar ceiling of her own bedroom and realized what had just happened. Rachel had gone to bed at 4 a.m. after finishing another marathon of projects for her clients. Her job as a digital consultant demanded long hours at the computer, and though it left her exhausted, it also paid her 3 times more than what her husband Mark earned at his office job. But to Helen, none of that mattered. In her eyes, Rachel was lazy, unworthy, a wife who refused to perform the real duties of a woman: cooking, cleaning, serving. This wasn't the first time Rachel had woken up to the sound of Helen's accusations. For the past 3 weeks, Helen and Frank, Mark's parents, had been living in their 2-bedroom apartment. What was supposed to be a short visit had stretched into something endless. The air inside the apartment had grown heavier with every passing day. Every complaint, every remark about how Rachel wasn't raised right. Their presence turned the home into a prison, a place Rachel dreaded waking up to. Helen's favorite topic was work. She refused to acknowledge Rachel's career as legitimate because it didn't require leaving the house every morning. No amount of explanation that Rachel spent 16 hours a day at her laptop managing accounts for corporations across the country made any difference. Helen dismissed it as playing on the computer, and every conversation circled back to the same accusation: Rachel didn't have a real job. Frank Adams wasn't much different. He had fewer words than his wife, but his criticisms landed just as harshly. He cared only for heavy, greasy meals, fried chicken, biscuits dripping with butter, bacon in mountains. Rachel, who preferred lighter, healthier dishes, often made grilled fish or vegetable pilaf. To Frank, that wasn't food. He would grunt from the kitchen table, pushing the plate away and saying she didn't know how to feed a man. "What kind of wife serves rabbit food?" he'd mutter. Every day since their arrival, Rachel had tried to endure. She told herself that losing her temper would only make things worse, that biting her tongue was the price of peace. But 3 weeks had worn her thin. She had given up her quiet mornings, her normal routine, and most of her sanity just to avoid another confrontation. Yet still, it wasn't enough. Helen seemed to believe it was her sacred duty to remind Rachel at every opportunity that she wasn't good enough. Not as a wife, not as a homemaker, not as a woman. Now, standing over her bed, Helen crossed her arms and tapped her foot, eyes flashing with indignation. I said, "Get up. The apartment is a mess, and Mark will be home for lunch. His shirts aren't even ironed. What have you been doing all this time?" Her voice grew sharper with every word. Rachel sat up slowly, her head heavy from lack of sleep. She pressed her lips together, swallowing back the fury that rose in her chest. The truth was that she wanted to scream, to throw Helen out of the room, to remind her that she had no right to burst in like this. But she didn't. Not yet. She had learned to control her reactions, to breathe deeply until the moment passed. The thought flickered in her mind. This wasn't a home anymore, it was a battleground. And every morning felt like waking into another fight she hadn't chosen. Rachel's hands trembled as she pushed the blanket aside, not from fear, but from restraint. She knew she couldn't keep enduring this forever. For now, though, she said nothing. She let Helen storm out of the room, muttering insults under her breath, while Frank's voice drifted from the kitchen, demanding a breakfast that Rachel didn't even have the strength to cook. She closed her eyes for a second longer, steeling herself. She would hold it in for now, but the cracks were forming, and she could feel something inside her starting to shift. Helen wasn't finished. Storming out of the bedroom, she began a loud parade through the small Denver apartment, slamming doors, tugging at curtains, muttering about dust on the shelves that wasn't there. Drawers were yanked open and shut. chairs dragged across the floor, as if she were staging some domestic battlefield where only she could be the victor. The chaos wasn't about cleaning. It was about making a point, about proving that Rachel was, in Helen's eyes, a failure. From the kitchen came the sound of Frank's voice, thick with irritation. He had finally woken up, his hair mussed, his face still puffy with sleep. "What's going on out there? And where's breakfast? A man can't live on coffee and salads. You've got nothing ready." His tone carried the weight of expectation, as if a meal should simply appear before him without question. Rachel stood frozen for a moment, her patience splintering like glass under pressure. For 3 weeks she had listened, endured, swallowed her pride in the name of peace. But this morning, after being jolted awake and ridiculed, something inside her refused to stay silent. She walked into the living room, her face pale, but her voice sharp, steady. "Enough," she said, the word cutting through Helen's rambling. "You have 30 minutes to pack your things and leave my home." The room fell still for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Helen blinked, stunned that Rachel dared to speak with such finality. Then her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're home? Don't flatter yourself, Rachel. This is Mark's apartment. You don't get to throw me out of my son's place. You are nothing here." Frank gave a satisfied grunt of agreement from the kitchen. "Exactly. Don't forget whose name is on the family. You'd be nowhere without him." Rachel felt her hands clench at her sides, the fury hot in her chest. She stepped closer, her voice low but unshakable. "This apartment was bought with our savings, and we're still paying the mortgage together. Your son couldn't have done it alone. Don't pretend you helped us. You didn't give a single dollar. So don't stand here and act like I'm living in some gift you handed down." Helen's face flushed red, her indignation flaring brighter than ever. "All you think about is money. That's all you care about. You're ungrateful, selfish," Rachel cut her off. "I think about fairness. And I'm telling you both. You are guests here, nothing more. And I will not live another day under your insults." For a moment, silence pressed down on the room. Frank shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing more, while Helen's chest rose and fell with the weight of her outrage. She looked ready to explode again, but Rachel had already turned away, her decision made. Inside, Rachel knew she couldn't win this war alone. Mark wasn't home yet, and facing his parents without his presence was a battle stacked against her. They would twist her words, escalate until she was cornered. She could already hear Helen muttering under her breath, already feel Frank's disapproval radiating like heat from the kitchen. Rachel drew a breath, steadying herself. The confrontation wasn't over. It couldn't be, not with Helen and Frank so deeply entrenched in their righteousness. But she had drawn her line in the sand. And even if Mark chose to ignore it later, even if he tried to brush her off, Rachel knew she had taken the first real step. She had spoken her truth, and she would not be silenced again. As Helen continued pacing, slamming cabinet doors and tossing accusations into the air, Rachel quietly gathered her composure. She knew when to fight and when to step aside, and for now, retreat was the wiser choice. But she carried with her the certainty that this moment had changed something. The next time, she wouldn't just warn them. She would act. Rachel slipped into her jeans, tied her hair back in a messy knot, and grabbed her laptop bag. Without another word to Helen or Frank, she walked out of the apartment, the door shutting behind her with a firm thud that felt like a small act of liberation. The crisp Denver morning air stung her cheeks as she stepped outside, and for the first time all day, she was able to breathe without the suffocating weight of her in-laws pressing down on her chest. She found refuge in a corner booth of her favorite cafe downtown, a place where the warm hum of espresso machines and quiet chatter always seemed to calm her nerves. She ordered a black coffee and set up her laptop, determined to lose herself in work. If she couldn't find peace at home, She would carve it out here, among strangers and the steady rhythm of her own typing. For the first half hour, she managed to focus, sending out emails, reviewing reports, even beginning to feel the tightness in her chest ease. But the moment of quiet didn't last. Her phone began to buzz with a relentless stream of notifications. At first, she ignored it, unwilling to let Helen invade this space as well. But the vibrations grew too persistent. With a sigh, Rachel unlocked her phone and opened Facebook Messenger. The screen was flooded with messages from Helen, each more vicious than the last. The insults came one after another. Lazy, worthless, a disgrace. Some messages went further, dripping with venom, suggesting that Rachel didn't deserve to live in peace at all. One line in particular made her skin crawl. "You'll regret the day you crossed me. Maybe sooner than you think." Rachel stared at the words, a cold wave of disgust washing over her. Her stomach clenched, not out of fear, but from the sheer toxicity of it all. It was one thing to hurl insults in person. It was another to type them out, leave them in writing, deliberate and cruel. She felt a tremor in her hand as she scrolled, but her mind was already working. She took screenshots of every single message, careful not to miss a word. She saved them in a folder on her phone, labeling it with the date and time. If Helen wanted to play this game, Rachel would meet her with evidence. When the last screenshot was saved, she blocked Helen's number without hesitation. The silence that followed was instant, like slamming a window shut on a storm. Rachel leaned back in her chair, the coffee cooling on the table beside her. The cafe's hum carried on around her, a stark contrast to the ugliness she had just witnessed on her screen. She felt drained, her body heavy with fatigue. She had worked until 4 a.m, been jolted awake by screams, and now endured a barrage of abuse from a woman who seemed determined to break her. Still, amid the exhaustion, a quiet realization was taking root. This wasn't just a bad morning. This wasn't a string of unlucky days. This was her life with Helen and Frank under her roof, and with Mark refusing to intervene. It was an environment soaked in hostility, one where she was expected to endure endless humiliation simply to keep the peace. She unlocked her phone again, this time not to read, but to act. She attached the screenshots in a message to Mark, typing slowly, her words deliberate. "I'm at the cafe downtown. We need to talk. Come here tonight." She hit send and placed the phone face down on the table, shutting her eyes for a moment. The fatigue seeped deep into her bones. But so did something else, clarity. Rachel could no longer lie to herself. She couldn't call this temporary or harmless. The truth was unavoidable. She could not live another day in that toxic space and still recognize herself. By the time the sun dipped behind the Rockies and the streets of Denver glowed with the pale orange of early evening, Rachel was still at the cafe. Her coffee had long gone cold, and her laptop sat closed in her bag. She hadn't been working for hours, just waiting. At 6 o'clock sharp, the bell above the cafe door chimed and Mark walked in. He looked tired, but not in the way she was. His exhaustion came laced with irritation, as if simply being asked to show up was an inconvenience. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on her. With a heavy sigh, he slid into the booth across from her, his expression already stormy. "So," he began without greeting, "what did you and Mom fight about this time?" His tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory, weary, as though she were the problem he had been forced to deal with. Rachel sat upright, her voice calm but resolute. "Mark, this isn't just another fight. I want your parents to leave. Tonight. I can't live like this anymore." Mark leaned back, crossing his arms, his jaw tightening. "Rachel, you're exaggerating. Mom's blood pressure has been all over the place. She's sick, you know that. Dad's stressed out. They don't mean everything they say. And now you're pushing me to throw them out? Do you want me to just abandon them?" Her chest tightened at his words, not because they surprised her, but because they were exactly what she feared. He wasn't just failing to defend her. He was taking his mother's side, justifying her cruelty. "I'm not asking you to abandon them," Rachel said carefully. "I'm asking you to draw a boundary. They've insulted me, they've invaded our home, and you've done nothing to stop it. If you want to support them, rent them their own place. Visit as much as you want, but they can't stay in our apartment any longer." Mark's eyes hardened. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "This is my home too. I have just as much right as you do to invite my parents to stay. You don't get to dictate who I let through that door." The final thread of restraint inside her snapped. Rachel felt heat rise to her face, but her voice emerged steady, unwavering. "Then listen to me, carefully. If they don't leave, I will. And if I leave, Mark, I won't be coming back. I will file for divorce." His mouth opened, then closed, caught off guard by the weight of her words. "Are you serious right now? You're making me choose between my family and my wife? Do you even hear yourself?" Rachel held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "You're wrong. I'm not asking you to choose between them and me. I'm asking you to respect me enough to not force me into a hostile environment every single day. I'm asking for the bare minimum, to feel safe in my own home. If you can't give me that, then what exactly do I have left in this marriage?" Mark stared at her, his eyes narrowing, his lips pressed into a thin line. His silence told her everything. He wasn't weighing her words. He was calculating how to push her back into submission. The moment stretched long, the air between them thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Rachel realized then, with a clarity that cut deep, that this wasn't about Helen or Frank or even the constant insults. This was about Mark. He didn't want to protect her. He wanted her to bend, to shrink herself until she fit into the role his parents had carved out for her. Her hands were steady now, the fear, the hesitation, gone. She had drawn her line, and she knew she wouldn't step back. The marriage wasn't a partnership anymore. It was a test of endurance she no longer wished to take. Rachel stood, slipping her bag over her shoulder, her voice calm but final. "Think about what I said. Either they leave or I do. But if I walk out, it's not just for tonight. It's for good." She left him sitting there in the booth, silent, the reflection of the cafe's neon lights flickering across his face. For the first time since this nightmare began, Rachel felt the ground steady beneath her feet. She understood the truth now. Her marriage had already cracked beyond repair. Mark didn't want to stand beside her. He wanted her to bow her head, and Rachel Adams was done bowing. Mark tried to recover from her ultimatum, his voice dropping into something almost pleading. "Look, Rachel, let's not blow this up. They'll only stay another week, maybe less. Mom just needs to get back on her feet. Dad will calm down. Can't you just hold on a little longer?" His words were meant to soothe, but to Rachel they sounded hollow. For 3 weeks she had endured, telling herself each day would be the last, and every time the intrusion grew worse. She had learned something the hard way. With Helen and Frank, there was never just one more week. Rachel folded her hands on the table, her tone even. "No, Mark, I'm not waiting one more week or one more day. I'm leaving. Tomorrow I'll come back for my things." Mark blinked, his expression tightening, as though he hadn't expected her to stay so calm. "You're really going to walk out? Over this?" Rachel nodded, steady. "Yes, because this isn't about them anymore, it's about you. You refuse to set boundaries. You refuse to protect me in my own home. That means I have to protect myself." Mark leaned forward, frustration creeping into his voice. "So what, you're going to throw away our marriage? Over a couple of arguments with my parents? That's crazy." Her voice sharpened, though it never rose. "It's not a couple of arguments, Mark. It's a pattern. 3 weeks of humiliation. 3 weeks of silence from you. I won't keep living like this." She paused, then continued, deliberate and precise. "And don't forget, this apartment is marital property. It belongs to both of us. If you want to keep it, you're still responsible for half the mortgage. You can't just let me walk away and pretend it's yours alone." That struck him. He stiffened, his jaw clenching. "So you're already talking about dividing assets? That fast?" Rachel held his gaze. "I have to, because I can see exactly where this is headed. I'm done waiting for things to get better when they never do." For a moment, Mark seemed to struggle between anger and disbelief, as if he thought she would eventually cave like always. But this time, there was no hesitation in her eyes. Rachel rose from her seat, slipping the strap of her bag over her shoulder. Her movements were slow, deliberate, but her heart no longer trembled. She felt the weight of finality pressing down on her, but beneath it was something lighter, a quiet resolve she hadn't felt in years. "Tomorrow," she said firmly, "I'll collect my things. I'll call an attorney. You'll hear from me about the divorce. And if you decide to keep this place, then remember, you'll be paying your share. Every month." Mark opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. He only sat there, staring, his face shifting between fury and fear. Rachel didn't wait for him to recover. She turned and walked out of the cafe into the cool Denver night. The city lights reflected in the glass windows, sharp and unyielding, like her own decision. For the first time in a long time, her steps felt firm, her back straight. She wasn't leaving in defeat. She was leaving with purpose. This was the point of no return. She knew it as she crossed the street, her bag pressed to her side. There would be no reconciliation, no pretending that things could go back to the way they were. The marriage had been fractured too deeply, and Mark had made his choice clear. He wanted obedience, not partnership. Rachel Adams was done giving him either. The divorce itself was finalized relatively quickly, but what followed was far from simple. The issue of the Denver apartment became a battle that stretched on for months. The court reviewed the finances carefully and determined what Rachel already knew would be the outcome. The apartment had been purchased during the marriage, with joint savings and a mortgage in both their names. That made it marital property. It was to be split evenly, with each holding 50% ownership and both remaining equally responsible for the mortgage payments. Rachel didn't fight that ruling. She understood it was the most practical path forward. What she could no longer tolerate was living under the same roof as Mark, or worse, his parents. So she found herself a small studio across town, a place where she could breathe without the constant intrusion of Helen's voice or Frank's disapproving glare. It wasn't large, but it was hers, quiet and filled only with her own things. Even after moving out, she maintained her 50% ownership of the apartment, determined not to surrender her rights. Mark stayed in the apartment, choosing to live in the larger space rather than downsizing. At first, he paid his share of the mortgage dutifully, though not without grumbling about the costs. But as weeks turned into months, his discipline faltered. Bills piled up. Deadlines passed. Rachel kept up with her half, sending in her portion of the payment on time every month. But she watched as Mark began slipping behind. The pattern became clear quickly. He wasn't managing. Whether it was poor budgeting, pride that kept him from asking for help, or simply his parents encouraging him to focus on anything but responsibility, the result was the same. Notices started arriving in the mail. The bank's patience was not endless. Rachel, meanwhile, focused on her work. Her projects flourished, her income grew, and her life in the studio, though modest, gave her the stability she craved. But she could see the storm gathering around the apartment. And though Mark might have thought he could let the debt slide, Rachel knew better. The mortgage was a legal tether binding them together, and his failures could easily drag her down too. The tension between them didn't fade after the divorce decree was signed. It simply shifted from personal arguments to financial standoffs. Rachel reminded him more than once that he was still responsible, that neglecting payments would have consequences for them both. But her warnings seemed to fall on deaf ears. Mark insisted he could handle it, yet the overdue notices told a different story. It was a bitter irony. He had fought so fiercely to keep his parents in that apartment, to claim it as his domain. Yet when given the chance to hold it on his own, he began to lose his grip. For Rachel, it was frustrating but not surprising. She had seen the cracks in his character long before the court put anything in writing. Now, living on her own, Rachel carried no illusions about reconciliation. The marriage was over, the love gone, and the apartment was no longer a home. It was a liability, a shared weight she wanted to shed. She was patient, but she also knew an opportunity was coming. If Mark couldn't keep up with his share, the bank would intervene. And when that happened, Rachel intended to be ready. Months dragged on, and the warning letters from the bank grew more urgent. Mark had stopped making his payments entirely. Rachel kept covering her share, but a mortgage didn't work like that. When one owner defaulted, both were at risk. The late fees mounted, and eventually the inevitable happened. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. Rachel received the notice with a sinking feeling, but she didn't let panic take hold. Instead, she acted quickly. She scheduled a meeting with the bank's representatives, walking into the office with a folder of documents in her hands. Proof of her consistent payments, records of her income, and the screenshots of correspondence showing Mark's neglect. She sat across from the loan officer, calm but firm. "I want to resolve this," she told them. "I'm prepared to cover the arrears, bring the loan current, and assume the responsibility myself. But I'll need full ownership. You know as well as I do that Mark isn't paying and won't. Let me take this off your books cleanly." The negotiation was tense but short. The bank didn't want a foreclosure dragging through the courts. It was costly and time-consuming. Rachel's offer was the simplest solution. She agreed to pay the outstanding balance and restructure the mortgage under her name alone. Mark's share, once valued at 50%, was reduced significantly because of the delinquency. In effect, Rachel bought him out for far less than the property's worth. When Mark found out, he exploded. He stormed into her messages, accusing her of trickery, of betrayal. He filed a lawsuit, claiming she had maneuvered behind his back. But the court dismissed his complaint swiftly. Everything Rachel had done was above board, documented, and entirely legal. She had given the bank money it was owed, and in return, she had secured what was rightfully hers. Helen and Frank were no quieter. They called, they wrote, they even showed up once at the building, shouting in the lobby about how their family's home had been stolen. But the truth was undeniable. They had no legal standing. Their names had never been on the deed, never on the mortgage. All they had were their voices, and now, even those couldn't touch her. Rachel stood in the apartment not long after the paperwork was finalized, a new set of keys warm in her hand. The rooms were quiet, the air still. For the first time in months, there was no shouting, no judgment, no weight pressing down on her shoulders. The place that had been a battleground was now hers alone. She walked slowly from room to room, her fingers brushing the walls. She remembered every insult thrown in these spaces. Every night she had cried herself to sleep. Every morning she had been jolted awake by Helen's scorn. But none of that mattered anymore. The apartment no longer carried the power of those memories. It carried her victory. Mark had tried to make her bend, to break her. His parents had tried to strip her of dignity. In the end, all three of them were left with nothing but bitterness. Rachel, on the other hand, had reclaimed more than just a property. She had reclaimed her independence, her peace, her future. The ink on the bank's agreement was still fresh, but Rachel already felt a weight lift from her chest. The apartment that had once symbolized control now marked the end of her oppression. Standing in the silence, she realized it was more than just real estate. It was proof that she had endured, fought back, and won. Rachel Adams was no longer a woman cornered by her in-laws or abandoned by her husband. She was the sole owner of her home, free from the chains of their demands. The marriage was over, the battles finished, and for the first time in years, the war inside those walls had truly ended. In the months that followed, Rachel poured herself into her work. Without the daily chaos of Helen and Frank in her space, without the constant tension of waiting for Mark to turn on her, her focus sharpened. Projects that once felt draining now energized her. She took on new clients, expanded her portfolio, and slowly built a financial cushion that made her feel secure in a way she never had before. The studio apartment she had rented remained her refuge, quiet and uncluttered, but she often returned to the larger condo she now fully owned, savoring the silence of its rooms. For the first time in years, the space belonged to her, and only her. Her spirit began to heal. The exhaustion that had once been constant started to lift, replaced by a steadier kind of strength. She went for long walks in the crisp Colorado air, spent afternoons in cafes by choice rather than desperation, and even rediscovered hobbies she had abandoned during her marriage. Slowly, the weight of those years pressed less on her shoulders. It was during this season of renewal that she met Daniel Cooper. Their paths crossed at a networking event downtown. He was a project manager in a local tech firm, confident but not arrogant, approachable in a way that put her at ease. Their first conversation was simple, about work and favorite hiking spots near Boulder. But there was something in his eyes, a steadiness that Rachel hadn't realized she had been searching for. They began meeting for coffee, then dinners. Daniel never pushed, never demanded. He listened. He respected her boundaries. When she spoke about her past, he didn't minimize it or change the subject. He simply acknowledged it, and in doing so, helped her feel understood. It was a sharp contrast to the dismissiveness she had endured for years. As weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened. Daniel admired Rachel's independence, but also reminded her she didn't have to carry everything alone. He showed up when he said he would. He called when he promised. He valued her career, not as a hobby, but as a real accomplishment. Slowly, Rachel allowed herself to trust again. Eventually, the day came when they decided to live together. The irony wasn't lost on Rachel when Daniel suggested moving into her condo, the very place that had once symbolized pain, battles, and betrayal. At first she hesitated, remembering the screaming matches, the slammed doors, the venomous words. But as she stood in those rooms beside Daniel, she realized the apartment had transformed. It wasn't haunted anymore. It was ready to become a home. They moved in together one crisp autumn weekend. Boxes piled in the living room. Laughter echoing down the hallway as they argued playfully over where to put the bookshelves. That night, as they sat on the couch surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Rachel looked around and felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. She thought back to the long road that had led her here, the insults, the betrayals, the courtroom battles, the lonely nights in a rented studio. None of it had been easy, but it had carried her to this moment. Divorce, she realized, hadn't been a failure. It had been the doorway to freedom. Now, with Daniel's hand resting warmly over hers, she could see the future clearly. A life built not on endurance or compromise, but on mutual respect and quiet love. The condo was no longer a battlefield. It was the foundation of a new beginning. As evenings settled over Denver, Rachel leaned back against Daniel, her eyes tracing the city lights through the window. The apartment was filled not with shouting or judgment, but with the gentle hum of possibility. And in that stillness, Rachel knew the truth. She hadn't lost a marriage. She had gained herself, and in doing so, she had found a love worthy of the woman she had become. They paged me just as I was wrapping up a consultation. "Dr. Graves, please report to the ER intake. Your husband's been brought in with a child." I froze. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My husband? Daniel? With a child? I didn't move. I just stared at the nurse, waiting for her to correct herself, to tell me she meant something else. But she didn't. Her eyes stayed fixed on mine, wide with alarm. They were both unconscious when the ambulance arrived. "Car accident." A bystander said the child kept calling him Dad. I don't remember leaving the room. I don't remember walking down the hallway or how I got into the elevator. but I remember the sound of my own heartbeat, like a war drum in my ears. I was a trauma surgeon. I'd seen people in pieces. I'd cut open bodies and stitched lives back together. But nothing prepared me for this, for the idea that my husband might have a child I didn't know about. That morning, everything had felt off. Daniel had kissed me on the forehead, told me he was heading to a job site early, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. His tie was crooked, and his fingers fidgeted with his car keys like a teenager caught in a lie. "See you tonight," he'd said, and I'd called after him, "Daniel, are you okay?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, everything's fine. Don't worry about me." But I did. I had been for weeks. Daniel had grown distant lately. Subtle things, really. His phone always face down. His cologne smelled unfamiliar. Once or twice, I thought I caught the scent of baby wipes in the car, but brushed it off as stress-induced imagination. We had no children, not for lack of trying. 8 years of IVF, hormone treatments, late nights with ice packs pressed to my lower abdomen, and early mornings watching test lines stubbornly remain blank. 8 years of grief. And Daniel had been by my side through all of it, or so I thought. Now, as I raced through the hospital corridor, my heels clicking against the linoleum, that entire version of our life flickered in and out like a dying light bulb. Maybe it had all been pretend, or maybe the truth had just found a new place to hide. When I entered the ER, I expected chaos. Instead, it was quiet, eerily so. A nurse guided me into a small consult room. Inside, the chief of surgery was waiting. His expression told me everything. "Dr. Graves," he said gently, "you might want to sit down." I didn't. Bad news feels more bearable when you're on your feet. There was a crash about 30 minutes ago. Your husband, Daniel Graves, was driving. He's stable, concussion, a few broken ribs, but he'll recover. I exhaled, just once, like collapsing into myself. But the chief hesitated. He wasn't alone. A 7-year-old boy was with him. Multiple eyewitnesses say the child called him Dad. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I could hear a clock ticking. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped. Everything else just stopped. "That can't be," I whispered. "That's impossible. We don't have children. We can't have children." The chief gave a sympathetic nod. "The boy's in pediatric ICU. Head injury, but the prognosis is good. He'll wake up soon. Daniel's asking to speak with you. Urgently." I stood there, frozen. A child, a son, a life I knew nothing about, sitting just one floor away from me. I had walked into this hospital a surgeon, a wife, a woman who thought she knew her life. But the woman who stood in that room now, she had no idea who she really was anymore. The hallway to Daniel's room felt like it stretched on forever. I walked past nurses who greeted me with tight, sympathetic smiles, past colleagues who averted their eyes as if my world hadn't just cracked open underfoot. I didn't smile back. I couldn't. My thoughts were loud, tangled, circling like birds around a carcass. A child, 7 years old, calling my husband Dad. I pressed my palm to my chest, hoping the pressure would stop the ache. It didn't. Daniel was in a private room at the end of the hall. Through the glass, I saw him lying back on the bed, for in his arm, bruises darkening along his cheekbone and temple. But he was awake, and when he saw me step inside, something shifted in his eyes, relief and fear all at once. "Allison," he whispered, trying to sit up. I raised a hand. "Don't," I said quietly. "Just don't move." I sat in the chair beside his bed, but I didn't take his hand. I couldn't trust what it had held. For a long moment, we didn't speak. The silence was heavy, filled with things neither of us wanted to say first. Finally, he looked at me and his voice cracked. "I'm sorry." 2 words, too late. I folded my arms across my chest, felt the sting at the corners of my eyes, but blinked it away. "Who is he?" My voice came out flat, surgical. "His name is Ethan," Daniel said, his throat working like it physically hurt to speak. He's my son." The word hit me like a slap. I flinched. How long have you known? I asked. About a year, he said. But he paused, closing his eyes. It didn't start out that way. I didn't know he existed until Rachel's mom called me. Rachel. The name rang a bell, faint, distant. She had worked with Daniel on a project 8 years ago. I remembered her vaguely. Brown hair, easy laugh, always offering to stay late. Rachel, I repeated slowly. As in Rachel Carter. Daniel nodded. After your third IVF cycle failed, he said softly, you threw yourself into work. You barely came home. We barely talked. I felt like I was watching you disappear. And so you slept with someone else, I finished for him. It wasn't a question. I was broken, Allison. So were you, he said. I'm not excusing it, I swear to God I'm not. But it happened. It was stupid and selfish, and I regretted it the second it ended. It was only 3 months. And then Rachel left. She told me she didn't want anything from me, that she was moving away. So you just moved on? Never checked? Never wondered if she kept the baby? I could hear my own voice rising. I didn't care. While I was blaming myself, going through surgeries and hormone shots and soul-crushing disappointment, you had a child growing up somewhere and you never said a word. I didn't know, Daniel insisted. I swear to you I didn't. Not until last year when her mother called. Rachel's dying, Allison. Cancer. Stage 4. She said Ethan needed to know who his father was before it was too late. I stared at the wall, trying to absorb it. Ethan. A boy with Daniel's eyes and God knows what else. A child who had existed while I was convincing myself that I was broken, that I had failed. So what now? I asked. You've been seeing him behind my back. Every weekend, Daniel admitted, shame coloring his voice. Buying groceries for them, paying for his school supplies, spending time with him. I told him I was just a family friend. I didn't know how to tell you. I pressed a hand to my forehead. You lied to both of us. I know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. And I'm sorry. I just didn't want to lose you. I stood up slowly, trying to breathe through the chaos spiraling inside me. I couldn't look at him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need air, I said, and walked out before he could stop me. And for the first time in our 15-year marriage, I didn't know if I was walking away or beginning to wake up. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I found myself walking the hospital corridors, turning corners out of muscle memory, ending up outside the pediatric ICU. The door was marked with a hand-painted sign. Please knock gently, tiny hearts healing inside. I knocked. A nurse I recognized from rounds let me in, her eyes softening when she saw me. Room 6, she whispered. He's stable, still sleeping, but he should wake soon. The room was filled with the faint beeping of machines, the sterile scent of antiseptic mixed with something warmer, like crayons and clean laundry. And there he was, Ethan, 7 years old, a small 4 in his arm, a bandage wrapped gently around his forehead. His dark curls were tousled across the pillow, and his cheeks still flushed from whatever trauma his little body had been through. But he was breathing steadily, peacefully, and he looked like Daniel. Not vaguely, not distantly. The same nose, the same chin, the same small crease above his right eyebrow that formed even in sleep. My knees went weak, and I sat down before I collapsed. I didn't know what I expected to feel. Rage? Jealousy? Grief? I had felt all those things in the last 3 hours. But now, sitting there with this boy barely an arm's length away, all I felt was hollow. Like the wind had blown through my life and left everything rearranged. On the table, next to his bed, there was a piece of paper and a box of crayons. A drawing. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was simple, childlike, but instantly recognizable. A red-roofed house, a sun with long yellow rays, and 3 figures holding hands. A tall man, a little boy, and a woman in a white coat with long hair. Underneath, in crooked handwriting, it said, "My family. For Daddy." My breath hitched. That woman in the white coat, that was me. I sat in stunned silence until I heard a small, raspy voice. Hi, I turned. Ethan's eyes were open, large, round, and startlingly dark. He blinked up at me, uncertain but not afraid. Are you the doctor? I swallowed. Yes, I'm Dr. Graves. He looked at me for a long moment. You're nice. You look like the lady in my picture. I tried to smile, but it didn't come out right. You drew this. He nodded proudly. Daddy said he has a wife who helps sick people. He says she's really smart and kind. I thought maybe that could be you. My throat closed. Maybe it is. Ethan tilted his head. Do you know my daddy? I do. I folded the paper back into its little square, hands still shaking. I know him very well. He relaxed against the pillow, blinking sleepily. Daddy tells me about you a lot. He says sometimes you're sad because you want a kid, but your tummy won't make one. His voice dropped to a whisper. I think that's really sad. Tears burned behind my eyes. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain biology or boundaries or betrayal. I just said, yeah, it is. Ethan smiled a little. I think you'd be a good mom, though. You have kind eyes. My heart twisted. This child, this beautiful, honest little soul. He didn't know who I was. Not really. He didn't know what I had lost, what I had fought for, what I had been denied. He didn't know that I was the wife of the man who had fathered him in silence. And yet he looked at me like I was someone safe. I reached out, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. He didn't flinch. You should rest now, I said softly. You've been through a lot. Ethan closed his eyes again, but whispered just before slipping into sleep, Will you come back? I didn't answer right away. I waited until I was sure my voice wouldn't crack. I will. And I meant it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the staff lounge, still in my scrubs, Ethan's drawing folded carefully in my lap. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. Probably a nurse catching a break between shifts. But all I could hear were Ethan's words echoing in my head. I think you'd be a good mom. You have kind eyes. What kind of world lets a child like that believe in someone like me? I stared at the crayon-drawn figures. The family I never thought I'd have. Drawn by the child I never knew existed. The child of my husband and another woman. At 6:30 a.m., I finally left the hospital and drove through the foggy streets of Charleston to the only person I could talk to, Emily Price, my best friend since med school. She opened her apartment door still in pajamas, a coffee mug in hand. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Oh God, what happened? I need to talk, I said, my voice hoarse. 10 minutes later, we were on her couch, her dog snoring at our feet, and I was telling her everything. The crash. The child, the drawing, the confession. Emily didn't interrupt. Not once. She just sat there, sipping her coffee, her brows furrowed deeper with each word. When I finally stopped, she set her mug down carefully. Allison, she said slowly, please tell me you're not thinking about staying with him. I rubbed my temples. I don't know. You should, she said firmly. This is betrayal. This is deceit. For a year, he let you believe everything was normal while he played dad on the weekends. Do you have any idea what that does to someone? I do, I whispered. I'm living it. Emily leaned forward. And the kid? What are you going to do? Pretend he's not part of this. I don't want to pretend, I admitted, my voice barely audible. I met him, Emily. I sat by his bed. I talked to him. He's kind. He's smart. He's 7, and he's already lost his mother, and now he might lose everything else, too. Emily sighed long and slow. You're too compassionate for your own good. That boy is not your responsibility. He isn't, I agreed, but he didn't ask for any of this. He didn't choose to be born into a lie. She gave me a long look. You're starting to care about him. I nodded. I already do. Emily shook her head, exasperated. You're grieving, Allison. This isn't love. It's trauma bonding. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it's clarity. That afternoon, I drove to North Charleston, to the old apartment where Ethan and his grandmother lived. I needed to see it. I needed to understand what kind of life he came from and whether there was a place for me in it. The building was tired, peeling paint, rusted railings, but clean. A little girl on the third floor waved at me as I climbed the stairs. When I knocked on the door, it opened slowly to reveal a frail woman with kind eyes, leaning on a cane. "Mrs. Carter?" I asked. She blinked, surprised. "Yes." "I'm Allison, Daniel's wife." Her hand flew to her chest. Oh my goodness. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," I said. "I just needed to see." She opened the door wider. "Then come in. You should see where your husband's son has been growing up." The apartment was small but warm. Handmade curtains, family photos, books stacked neatly on shelves. It smelled like lemon cleaner and sugar cookies. There were drawings on the fridge, pirates, dragons, a big red heart with the word Daddy written across it. Mrs. Carter watched me look. "He's a good boy," she said quietly. "He misses his mother, but he's still smiling." I closed my eyes. "He thinks I'm the woman from his drawings." "Maybe you are." I turned to her. "I don't know what I'm doing." She smiled sadly. "None of us do. We just try to do right by the children." And that's when I realized I wasn't here to confirm what I already knew. I was here to ask myself what I was willing to become. Mrs. Carter led me into a small living room that doubled as a dining space. The furniture was worn but spotless, and the windows let in the soft afternoon light. On the wall, framed photos of a young woman. Rachel smiled back at me. She looked kind, delicate. There was one photo of her cradling a newborn baby, her eyes glassy with exhaustion but glowing with love. I couldn't look at it for long. "She was stubborn," Mrs. Carter said, her voice warm with memory. "Even as a little girl. Wouldn't take help unless she absolutely had to. When she found out she was pregnant, she told me she'd handle it on her own. Said Daniel had a life, a wife, and she wasn't going to interfere." I listened in silence, unsure whether to feel admiration or fury. "She raised Ethan herself," Mrs. Carter continued. "I helped as much as I could, but we never told the boy who his father was. Rachel said he'd figure out someday. Or maybe he'd never need to." Her voice broke a little, but when the cancer got bad, when we knew time was short, she changed her mind. Said Ethan deserved the truth, even if it was messy. I looked down at my hands, folded tightly in my lap. "Daniel told me she asked him to step in." "She did. He came the same week we called." She smiled softly. He looked shell-shocked, seeing Ethan for the first time. Like he'd just stepped into a life he forgot he was part of. I nodded slowly. I could picture that. Daniel, standing awkwardly in a doorway, seeing a miniature version of himself and realizing what he had lost, or maybe what he had been too afraid to face. "She made him promise to stay in Ethan's life," Mrs. Carter added. "And he has. Every weekend. Grocery runs, school meetings, bedtime stories. He doesn't call him Dad yet, but," her eyes glistened, "he knows." Ethan's laughter suddenly rang out from the back room, light and bright, and something in me cracked. I followed the sound and found him sitting at a tiny desk, coloring furiously. When he looked up and saw me, his face lit up. "You came." I smiled, trying to steady my voice. "Of course I did. You feeling better today?" He nodded, then turned the drawing toward me. "Look, it's us." The picture showed 4 stick figures this time, 1 tall man, 1 small boy, 1 older woman with a cane, and 1 woman in a white coat. All holding hands, all smiling. "That's Daddy and Grandma. And you and me," he said, pointing at each. "I drew our future." I crouched beside him. "You think that's how it's going to be?" "I hope so," he said shyly. "Daddy always talks about you. Says you're the bravest person he knows. He said you make people better." I swallowed hard. That's my job. He said, maybe you'd make our family better too. I closed my eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by how simple it all seemed in his mind. There were no complications in Ethan's world, just drawings and stories and love, even if it came from broken places. Ethan, I said gently, what would it mean to you if I became your mom? His eyes widened, then sparkled. You mean for real? I nodded. He threw his arms around my neck so fast it knocked the air out of me. I promise I'll be a really good son, he whispered into my hair. You won't regret it. Tears welled up in my eyes as I held him close. His body was small, warm, full of trust one didn't deserve, but desperately wanted to earn. From the doorway, Mrs. Carter watched us silently, her hands pressed to her mouth. When I met her gaze, she nodded as if to say, it's okay. He's yours now, too. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if motherhood wasn't something I had to create, but something I had to accept. Later that evening, I drove back to the hospital to check on Daniel. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I needed answers. Maybe I just needed to see if he was still the same man who used to fall asleep beside me, reading medical journals and whispering ideas for baby names we never got to use. His room was dim when I walked in, and he was sitting up, changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, folding his discharge papers slowly, like they weighed 1,000 pounds. He looked up when I entered. You went to see him. I nodded. He swallowed. And I'm here. He looked down at his hands. Allison, I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that. What I did, what I kept from you, was cowardly. I was afraid I'd lose you. You already had, I said quietly, sitting down across from him. The second you chose silence over truth. Daniel closed his eyes. I never meant to replace what we lost. I leaned forward. You didn't, but you built something new without telling me. That's not just betrayal, Daniel. That's a life you chose to live without me in it. He looked shattered. So what now? I hesitated. The silence stretched between us like a thread I wasn't sure I wanted to snap. Ethan's a wonderful child, I said. He's sweet and smart and so open it hurts. Daniel's face softened. He is. I care about him, I continued, feeling the weight of every word. But I don't know what that means yet. I don't know what that makes me. Daniel nodded. You don't owe him anything. Or me. I know, I said, but that's not why I'm here. He looked at me, puzzled. I'm here because he asked me something today, I said, and I didn't know how to answer. Daniel's breath caught. What did he ask? I met his gaze. He asked if I could be his mom. The words lingered in the air like smoke. Daniel blinked, and something inside him broke wide open. What did you say? I said I didn't know, I admitted. I didn't want to lie. He closed his eyes again, lips trembling. I never told him about us, about who you are. I told him I knew someone incredible. I told him about the woman who never gave up on people, even when they broke her heart. I bit down hard, forcing back the sting behind my eyes. He's already lost his mother, Daniel whispered. I couldn't let him lose the idea of you two. I stood. This isn't about me being an idea, Daniel. It's about whether I can be a real person in his life. Someone who shows up. Someone who stays. Can you? He asked, almost afraid to hope. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I want to try. For him. Daniel nodded slowly. Then I'll support you, however you need me to. Before I left, I stopped by the pediatric wing one more time. Ethan was sitting up in bed, drawing again, his face lighting up the moment he saw me. You came back. I told you I would. He patted the bed beside him. I sat. He glanced at the nurse, then leaned in and whispered, Did you think about it? About what? I asked, even though I already knew. About being my mom, he said. I mean, not just in the picture. For real. I took a breath, then reached for his hand. Ethan, being a mom is a big thing. It means showing up every day. even when it's hard, even when I mess up. He nodded solemnly. I can help you. I'm good at things. I smiled through a blur of tears. I'm sure you are. So, is that a yes? He asked, his voice so small I almost missed it. I squeezed his hand. It's a maybe, but it's a real maybe, the kind that could turn into a forever. He beamed like the sun had risen just for him. And maybe in some small way it had. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight slanting across my coffee, untouched and growing cold. In front of me was a yellow legal pad filled with scribbled lists. Reasons to stay, reasons to walk away, what Ethan needs, what I can handle. None of the lists gave me peace. Every time I tried to calculate a way forward, it brought me right back to the same impossible place, the space between what I wanted and what I feared. I knew I could love that child. I already did in some small, fragile way. But could I raise him while living in the shadow of the betrayal that brought him into the world? Could I walk into the room every morning and see the eyes of the woman my husband never meant to love, but still created life with? I drove back to the hospital before visiting hours officially started. Daniel was already dressed, standing by the window, a small overnight bag slung over his shoulder. When I walked in, he turned slowly, like he'd been hoping I'd come, but didn't quite believe I would. Allison, he said, his voice cautious. I need to talk to you, I said, and I need you to listen. He nodded, set his bag down. I took a breath. I've decided to be Ethan's guardian. I'm going to be in his life, fully. His shoulders dropped in relief, eyes glinting with disbelief. You're serious? I'm serious. He took a step toward me, but I held up a hand. But I'm not doing it for you, Daniel. I'm doing it for him. And there are conditions. He froze, waiting. First, I said, there will be no more lies, no more secrets. You tell me everything. If there's anything else, any part of your past that could hurt this child or me, I want it out in the open now. There's nothing else, he said immediately. I swear. Second, I continued, we're not pretending we're okay. You and I have a lot to repair. This isn't a clean slate. This is a rebuild from the rubble. He nodded slowly. I understand. I want to rebuild it. With you. And third, I added, we make Ethan the priority. Not our guilt, not our shame. Him. Daniel's voice cracked. He's already everything to me. I looked down, tears stinging again. He asked me to be his mom last night. Daniel pressed a hand to his mouth, overwhelmed. He said he'd try hard to be a good son, I whispered, as if he needed to earn it. Daniel shook his head, voice breaking. He doesn't. He's already perfect. I nodded. Then let's give him the family he's been drawing for years. We didn't hug. Not yet. There were still too many cracks between us. But something shifted, some invisible thread readying itself. Not tightly, not completely, but enough. That evening, we drove together to Ethan's apartment. Mrs. Carter opened the door, surprised to see us both. I suppose today's the day, she said, already misty-eyed. Ethan ran down the hallway, feet slapping against the laminate floor, and threw himself into Daniel's arms. You're okay. I am, Daniel said, hugging him tightly. And I have some news. Ethan looked at me, wide-eyed. Is it? I crouched down in front of him. Ethan, how would you feel about coming home with us? His hands flew to his mouth, and then he launched into my arms like a rocket. Yes, yes, yes. Mrs. Carter wiped her eyes. You've made him the happiest boy in the world. I held Ethan tight, my arms trembling. No, he did that for me first. And just like that, what had started in silence and shame began to turn into something else entirely. Something fragile, yes, but something worth saving. 3 weeks later, the guest room in our house had become Ethan's room. It still smelled faintly of paint and new carpet, and the walls were now covered in planets, spaceships, and dozens of his drawings, some new, some carefully preserved from his grandmother's fridge. One of them showed the 4 of us again, but this time there was something different. A dog. We didn't have one. Yet, I stood in the doorway one morning, watching him hum to himself while lining up his toy dinosaurs in what looked like a careful battle formation. He wore the Star Wars pajamas I'd bought him on impulse. Too big, but he didn't care. He saw me and grinned. Mom, look, the T-Rex is winning. I froze. It was the first time he'd said it. The word. He didn't even notice. He just kept narrating the battle, waving the toy like it had always been mine to see. I stepped into the room, slowly, kneeling beside him. Say that again. He blinked. What? What did you just call me? He smiled. Mom. It was soft, natural, like it had always been that way. I swallowed. Do you want to call me that? He shrugged. Yeah, you make pancakes better than Dad, and you smell like shampoo and hugs. That night, I cried in the laundry room. Ugly cried, not because I was sad, but because I finally understood that love doesn't always arrive the way you planned. Sometimes it sneaks in through the side door wearing pajamas 2 sizes too big and holding a toy dinosaur. Daniel had been keeping his distance, like he promised. He slept in the downstairs den, worked late, and only entered my space when invited. It was strange and quiet and respectful, like co-parenting with a ghost. One night, after Ethan had gone to sleep, I found him outside on the porch, staring at the stars. I handed him a cup of tea and sat beside him. I didn't think you'd stay, he said softly. I didn't think I would either, I admitted. Silence settled between us, but it wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. He calls you Mom now, Daniel said, smiling faintly. I know. He's happy. So am I whispered. He turned to look at me, and us. I looked up at the night sky, the same one Ethan had drawn 100 times. We're something new. Not what we were. Not yet what we'll be. Daniel nodded slowly. That's fair. We didn't need to define it yet. What mattered was that we were both still here, showing up for the same little boy, and maybe someday for each other. The following week, Ethan brought home a school assignment, Draw Your Family. He handed it to me with the proudest smile I'd ever seen. The picture had 3 people and 1 dog again. Me, Daniel, Ethan, and a golden retriever. You put the dog in again, I said, smiling. He grinned, because I know we'll get one. I just haven't picked his name yet. Shouldn't we wait until we actually have the dog? I teased. Nope, he said confidently. Some families come from hope before they come from truth. And somehow, that 7-year-old knew exactly what my heart had taken months to understand. We weren't perfect. We were healing. We were stitched together from betrayal and forgiveness, truth and tenderness. We were a family,